Welcome to LG Path Lab's monthly pathology webinar series. Today we have Dr. Pooja Bakshi with us, who is a senior consultant cytopathologist at Sir Gangaram Hospital in New Delhi, India. She has a vast experience and a special interest in ultrasound-guided FNAs in intra-abdominal organs, especially pancreas, lung, and lymph nodes. She has been a chief guide and co-guide to many DNB students. She also has many publications in field of cytology in both national and international journals. Welcome, Dr. Pooja, and now it is over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Limsey, for inviting me to this webinar. My talk today is on endoscopic ultrasound-guided FNA of pancreatic adenocarcinoma and pancreatitis. Imaging coupled with cytology is often the first line of investigation in pancreatic masses, and the cytology sample can be obtained by CT-guided FNA, ultrasound-guided FNA, brushings, or by the endoscopic ultrasound-guided, that is EUS FNA, which is now the method of choice in most centers if available. It uses the endoscope and high-frequency ultrasound, that is the echoendoscope. The echoendoscope is passed through the oral route into the stomach and then into the duodenum. And through this transgastric or transduodenal route, the sample is obtained from the surrounding intra-abdominal organs. It allows continuous real-time visualization of the FNA needle as it passes through the gut wall into the target lesion. As is clear from the anatomy of this pancreas, the pancreatic head and the uncinate is sampled best through the duodenum, whereas the body and tail of pancreas is sampled best from the stomach wall. The main advantage of EUS FNA when we compare it to the previous methods of CT and ultrasound-guided FNA is the higher adequacy rates and also the high sensitivity and specificity. The needle path is short because we are already inside an intra-abdominal organ, and going through the gastric and duodenal wall into the surrounding target lesion is much simpler. Small lesions can be sampled, and at the same time, staging can be done by detecting the vascular and nodal involvement. Of course, disadvantage is that training and expertise is required to perform the procedure and also to interpret the cytomorphology. Cost can also be a barrier. When we do the EUS FNA, rapid on-site evaluation is done in most centers, and the aim is basically mainly to assess the adequacy of the sample, and you can give a provisional diagnosis. Air-dried and wet-fixed smears are usually prepared and stained with May, Grunwald, Gimza, and Papin-Coulon stain respectively. It is preferable to prepare a cell block, which can be then stained with routine H&E stain and also used for immunohistochemistry. Material can also now be taken in the appropriate fixators for liquid-based cytology, flow cytometry, and for molecular studies. On imaging, pancreatic lesions can appear as solid cystic, or as diffuse bulky masses. And before we interpret the cytosmears, we must know the imaging and EUS findings of the lesion because it is imperative to correlate the cytology with the imaging. The Papin-Coulon Society proposed the 6-tiered system for reporting of pancreatobiliary cytology, mainly the non-diagnostic category, negative for malignancy, atypical, neoplastic benign, suspicious for malignancy, and the positive for malignancy. When you aspirate the normal pancreas, what do you see? Usually they are very cellular smears and the acinar component is predominant. You see these grape-like clusters of acinar structures with very polygonal cells with basal nuclei and apical granular cytoplasm. The other component is the ductal epithelium. As you can see here, it is arranged in flat honeycomb sheets with non-mucinous epithelium, with evenly spaced out nuclei, preserved polarity, very round and uniform nuclei with very smooth nuclear membranes. This is very important. even chromatin, and inconspicuous nucleoli. So this is how a normal pancreatic ductal epithelium will look like. One should also be aware that as the needle passes through the stomach or the duodenal wall, you're going to get some gastrointestinal mucosal contaminants along with the needle onto the smears. So you must learn to interpret these because you can misinterpret them as atypical epithelium. So on the left, this is the duodenal epithelium, large flat sheets of non-mucinous epithelium with goblet cells, giving it this fried egg appearance. You may also get the gastric epithelium along with the mucin, and sometimes mesothelial cell sheets may also be there in the smears. So let's go on to case 1. This was a 56-year-old male who presented with pain abdomen and obstructive jaundice. The serum CA-99 levels were elevated. On the endoscopic ultrasound, the CBD and the pancreatic duct were dilated. This is called as the double duct sign. Pancreas showed calcification in the pancreatic parenchyma in the head, and a 2.5 centimeter hypoechoic mass lesion was seen in the pancreatic body. This mass was encasing the splenic vessels, so impression was query-inflammatory, query-malignant. These were the EUS FNA smears that we received, and this is the May-Grunwald-Gimza stain. As you can see, the smears are pretty cellular. There are variable size fragments. They are loosely cohesive, with some smaller groups and single cells also seen, and the normal pancreatic acini are not seen. Going on, if you go into within these groups, you can see that there is architectural disarray. The normal honeycomb pattern, as I showed earlier, is lost. The normal polarity is lost. The nuclei are actually climbing on top of each other. So there is nuclear overlapping, crowding. There is nuclear enlargement, as you can see here. There's variation in the size of the nuclei, and there is nuclear hyperchromasia. So it doesn't look like the usual ductal epithelium that I showed earlier. This is the Pap stain, which is a very good stain to highlight the nuclear details, which is a must for interpretation of pancreatic FNA. Very important to see this 4:1, more than 4:1 variation in the nuclear size within a single epithelial group. As you can see here, there's marked anisonucleosis. Also, there are prominent nucleoli, as can be seen here in some of these single tumor cells. There is clumped and coarse chromatin, and also the atypical mitotic figures, which were also seen in this case. A very important feature which we saw were these irregular nuclear membranes causing this cleaving or notching of the nuclei. Some single tumor cells, which are lying here. Increased nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, the nuclei are enlarged, and there was necrosis, which was seen in the background focally. If you compare with some of these benign groups that was intermixed, you can clearly see the atypia in this fragment. There is completely loss of the architectural polarity. There's disorientation, nuclei are pleomorphic and with nuclear overlapping and nucleoli. At some places, we can also see the intracytoplasmic mucin vacuoles. So this was a case of ductal adenocarcinoma of the pancreas, the usual type. Now we know that pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma is the most common pancreatic malignancy, almost 90% of all pancreatic tumors. It is associated with a high mortality rate. 70% are located in the pancreatic head, 20% in the body, and about 10% in the tail. The various risk factors associated with this can be tobacco smoking, obesity, high intake of fats, diabetes, but most important is a history of chronic pancreatitis, which raises the risk almost tenfold. We should know a little about the imaging. When a tumor is present in the pancreatic head, usually it causes dilatation of both the common bile duct and the main pancreatic duct, the double duct sign, as was seen in this case also, and it is considered to be a pointer to malignancy. These patients present early with obstructive jaundice in the pancreatic head. Tumors in the body, they present late as large masses and often with metastasis. Majority of these tumors present as solitary masses and on EUS are seen as echo-poor non-homogeneous mass lesions. Vessel involvement on EUS is a very important sign indicating malignancy and can help you in arriving at a diagnosis when you are stuck in some tough situation. The reported sensitivity of EUS-FNA for diagnosing pancreatic adenocarcinoma ranges from 50 to 98%, whereas the specificity can be as high as 100%. Now, what are the main differential diagnoses? We know that pancreatitis, though it's an inflammatory process, can form a mass-like lesion on radiology. And this is the main differential diagnosis, especially when you have to differentiate it from a well-differentiated adenocarcinoma. We know in practice this can be a real challenge at times, and you have to resort to correlation with clinical imaging, serum tumor markers to help arrive at the correct diagnosis. So chronic pancreatitis, autoimmune pancreatitis, and groove pancreatitis all can form masses which can clinically and radiologically mimic adenocarcinoma. The other differential is the acinar carcinoma of pancreas, but it mainly forms acinar formations with granular cytoplasm and prominent nucleoli. So when you have unequivocal cytological features, you can go ahead and give a diagnosis of ductal adenocarcinoma. But when you have qualitative or quantitative deficiencies in the cytologic features, then a diagnosis of suspicious for malignancy is often rendered. Then at that point, it is imperative to correlate with the clinical, imaging, and the cytology findings to arrive at a diagnosis. And if you still cannot go ahead further than suspicious, you may do a repeat cytology sampling. You can refer to an expert in this field, or you can resort to some ancillary testing like special stains like mucicarmine, PAS, immunohistochemistry, molecular studies, and the fluid CEA and amylase levels. Though immunohistochemistry is there, but there is no reliable IHC marker which can differentiate a well-differentiated adenocarcinoma from chronic pancreatitis or from bile duct carcinoma. But these are some of the useful markers which may be used, like cytokeratin 7, 8, 18, and 19. The MUC1, 3, 4, and 5 AC are positive. CEA, CA99 and B72.3, Claudin, P53. And loss of SMAD4 is considered to be very good in diagnosing pancreatic adenocarcinoma, and especially in differentiating from chronic pancreatitis because it is retained in chronic pancreatitis. However, this is seen only in about 55% cases of the adenocarcinomas. And then come the molecular mutations. So what are the genes which are mutated in pancreatic cancer? So the most common is the KRAS. This activating mutation of the KRAS oncogene, it is the most common genetic abnormality seen in 90 to 95%. It can be used as a prognostic biomarker and as a tool for predicting response to therapy. The other genes which are mutated are P53, the CDKN or the P16, the SMAD4, BRCA1, and BRCA2. SMAD4 is a tumor suppressor protein, and many new driver mutations are coming up other than these detected by the next generation sequencing. And these may be the way forward in the future where you can resort to molecular testing, especially on the cytology material, because it can be done on the FNA sample. Some morphological variants I've just wanted to highlight. Now, these are just histological variations. They don't really have a prognostic significance, but they can raise a confusion in diagnosis, like the clear cell type. The clear cytoplasm with centrally located atypical nuclei may take you away from diagnosis of adenocarcinoma. This clear cytoplasm is not due to accumulation of glycogen or mucin. There is overexpression of the hepatocyte nuclear factor by IHC. Then is the foamy gland type, which has a very deceptive bland appearance with very prominent microvesicular foamy cytoplasm. So you have to see the nuclei carefully. The large duct type, which shows these irregular jagged contours of large ducts with desmoplastic stroma, and the vacuolated type, which has tumor cells with large vacuoles, giving it a cribriform appearance, but it has the large atypical nuclei. It's a high-grade tumor. What is important to recognize are these WHO variants of adenocarcinoma because they have clinical and prognostic implications. So first is the colloid or the mucinous non-cystic carcinoma, which has a better prognosis. The adenosquamous carcinoma, where the squamous component should be at least 30% of the tumor, it has a poorer prognosis than the usual ductal adenocarcinoma. Anaplastic carcinoma, which shows large undifferentiated, markedly pleomorphic cells, it has a poor prognosis. Undifferentiated carcinoma with osteoclast-like giant cells, which are reactive, this also has a poor prognosis. The mixed adenoneuroendocrine carcinoma, each should be at least 30% of the tumor. And the rare medullary, hepatoid, and signet ring cell type. Now here the cytomorphology is the main key to diagnosis, but IHC can play a supportive role. Now this was a case of adenosquamous carcinoma. As you can see, these are the flat sheets of tumor cells which have a squamoid differentiation. And within these groups, you can see some of these keratinized tumor cells. This is the glandular component of the tumor. And IHC here was helpful to highlight the squamous component, that is P40 positive. Remember that pure squamous carcinoma is very rare. And if you see such a tumor in the pancreas, instead of a primary, you must consider a metastatic tumor, especially from the lung, and rule it out. This was a case of anaplastic carcinoma. And as you can see, the tumor cells are loosely dispersed, singly dispersed, and they are highly pleomorphic, very bizarre tumor cells, polygonal to spindle shaped, hyperchromatic pleomorphic nuclei with some tumor giant cells also, very coarse chromatin, abnormal atypical mitotic figures, which are numerous. And these need to be differentiated from sarcoma, melanoma, and anaplastic lymphoma. And you can resort to immunohistochemistry to help. The next variant is the colloid or the mucinous non-cystic carcinoma. And you can see these abundant pools of mucin in which the tumor cells are floating, as you can see here. Small cuboidal to columnar cells or even signet ring cell morphology. These are usually large, well-demarcated tumors. They arise often in association with an IPMN. They are MUC2 and CDX2 positive, and they have a more favorable prognosis as compared to the usual ductal adenocarcinoma. This mucin can be very well recognized in the May-Grunwald-Jimza stain as bright pink material or in the PAP as this greenish blue background. So that was about adenocarcinoma and its variants. Now let's go to the case 2. This was a 45-year-old male, an alcoholic with recurrent abdominal pain. And on EUS, the CBD was thick-walled, compressed in the pancreatic head. The pancreas was bulky, hyperechoic strands were seen, lobularity was seen, and there was an ill-defined mass in the bulky head. The pancreatic duct showed calcifications. The vessels were normal. So impression was query inflammatory mass. So when we did the USFNA, these are the smears, and the cellularity was low. The epithelial fragments were not many. The acinar component was not seen. What we saw were only the ductal component, many fragments of this fibrous tissue, some cell debris and calcification in the background. Many of these epithelial groups showed reactive nuclear changes in the form of nuclear enlargement, some nuclear overlapping, but the anisonucleosis was not prominent, as I showed in the previous case, and there were no atypical mitosis. In most of the places, you saw these kind of ductal epithelial groups with a very honeycombed appearance, separated out round monomorphic nuclei, no overlapping. These were the fragments of fibrous tissue, some other ductal epithelial elements, and this was a cell block which showed similar morphology with some fibrosis and some inflammation. So this was chronic pancreatitis. FNA was basically done to exclude malignancy because clinically and radiologically they can appear like a mass and mimic malignancy. Also, they can coexist with a malignancy. So you need to do FNA in these cases sometimes to rule out an adenocarcinoma. The biggest challenge when you see such cases is to differentiate a well-differentiated adenocarcinoma from chronic pancreatitis. And we all know, who deal with pancreatic FNAs, this can be a real troublesome area and can give you sleepless nights at times. So in a well-differentiated adenocarcinoma, you're going to see these cohesive groups of epithelial cells. But if you see within these groups, you can see the classic drunken honeycomb sheet appearance. That is, the nuclei are not very uniformly arranged as in a honeycomb sheet. There is some loss of polarity. The nuclei are haphazardly oriented. There is nuclear overlapping, some enlargement, there's crowding, and there is some anisonucleosis. You can appreciate in the PAP the nuclear membrane irregularity, which is a very important feature to see. So a lot of authors have tried to evaluate what are the important features one should look for when you try to differentiate these two lesions. And most of the authors have talked about these 4 points. First being marked anisonucleosis, that is more than 4:1 in the same epithelial group, and nuclear membrane irregularity with presence of deep notches, grooves, popcorn-like cells. So if these two factors are present, then you are pretty sure that you're dealing with an adenocarcinoma. The others are nuclear crowding, loss of polarity, and nuclear enlargement. But remember, these can be seen even in pancreatitis focally. The other features which we are used to seeing, like macronucleoli, necrosis, single atypical cells, atypical mitosis, are usually seen in the moderate to poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma and may not be observed in well-differentiated adenocarcinoma. The false negative and suspicious rate for malignancy, which is about 5 to 12% mostly, is mainly due to the underdiagnosis of this well-differentiated adenocarcinoma group, insufficient cellularity, or due to sampling errors. Does IHC have a role to play here? Well, you can use it, though it is not always helpful. If the SMAD4 is lost on IHC, then it is a good pointer towards pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma because it is usually retained in chronic pancreatitis. However, it is lost only in about 50% of the pancreatic. The other markers are S100, IMP3, P53, which are positive, whereas VHL is negative. The serum CA19 and CEA levels, these tumor markers, are elevated in adenocarcinoma. However, they can also rise in pancreatitis. Therefore, the sensitivity is only 40 to 50% and specificity is about 68 to 90%. So you cannot completely rely on these serum tumor markers. As I talked about the mutations, these are the 4 key driver mutations which occur in adenocarcinoma and can be helpful if you can demonstrate it as differentiating from chronic pancreatitis. The KRAS mutation is an early event, and the CDKN, the P53, and the SMAD4. So that was about differentiating chronic pancreatitis from adenocarcinoma and the challenges that we often face. Coming next to case 3. Now, this was a 69-year-old male, a chronic smoker and alcoholic who presented with recurrent abdominal pain. EUS showed bulky pancreatic head, and the duodenal wall adjacent to the pancreatic head was hypoechoic with thick wall collection in the duodenal wall. EUS FNA was done from the cystic collection and also from the pancreatic head. Biochemical analysis of this fluid showed mildly raised CEA and amylase, but CA99 levels were within normal limits. So what did we see on the EUS FNA smears? The predominant component were these spindle stromal fragments, as you can see here, with very bland spindle nuclei within. Another fragment of this stromal fragment with these bland spindle nuclei. There were no mitosis, no significant pleomorphism. Here again, the spindle stromal fragments and cellular debris in the background, some benign pancreatic ductal epithelial groups. Another feature which is seen in the smears are these collections of cells which are polygonal with abundant foamy cytoplasm. These are the Brunner glands. So what is the diagnosis? This was a case of groove pancreatitis, which shows on histopathology the duodenal muscle hyperplasia, which is what we saw corresponding in the FNA smears, these spindle cell fragments, and Brunner gland hyperplasia, which also we saw in the FNA smears like this. So what is groove pancreatitis? It is a type of focal chronic pancreatitis affecting the groove, that is the area between the head of pancreas, duodenum, and the common bile duct. So this area is the groove. And when there is repeated inflammation in this area, it forms a scar-like tissue, which can be confused as malignancy on radiology. Often there is history of alcohol abuse. CEA, CA19 levels are usually normal. Amylase and lipase may be raised. On CT, there is thickening of the duodenal wall. There's hypodense hypovascular mass between the pancreas and duodenum. And if you're not aware of the features on FNA, you may confuse it to be a mesenchymal neoplasm or some other tumor. So that is where the importance of knowing about this lesion lies. Going to the last case, that is case 4. This is a 37-year-old male who complained of abdominal pain. The gallbladder and CBD was thick-walled. Pancreas was bulky and heteroechoic with ill-defined margin. It was diffusely enlarged. Pancreatic duct was not dilated. There were no lymph nodes and enlarged lymph nodes, and the vessels were normal. So what did we see on the EUS FNA smears? As you can see, the background is very busy. And there is a moderately dense lymphoplasmacytic chronic inflammatory infiltrate in the background. Interspersed within this are these groups of benign pancreatic ductal epithelium and the benign pancreatic. Many fibrous tissue fragments were also seen in the FNA smears, also with infiltrated by these lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate. This is a cell block which shows similar morphology, fibrosis, moderately dense chronic inflammatory infiltrate, and the acini and the ducts. At places, it was seen infiltrating around the blood vessels also. So it was query a chronic pancreatitis or an autoimmune pancreatitis. So when you see such dense lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate and fibrosis in the pancreas, you have to consider diagnosis of an autoimmune pancreatitis as well. We did an IgG4 IHC staining, and as you can see here, there are numerous IgG4 positive cells, again here, highlighted here, which were more than the required criteria of more than 10 positive cells per HiPA field, with an IgG4 IgG ratio of more than 40%. The serum IgG4 levels of this patient turned out to be high, and the CA99 levels were normal. So this was a case of autoimmune pancreatitis, but before you diagnose this condition, you must correlate all these features, that is the clinical, the biochemical, imaging findings, the serum IgG4 levels, and the IgG4 positivity on the FNA or the cell block. It is important to know about this lesion because clinically and radiologically, they can mimic an adenocarcinoma. There are two types, the lymphoplasmacytic sclerosing pancreatitis, which shows elevated serum IgG4 levels, and normal CEA and CA99. It has a strong association with extrapancreatic autoimmune processes. There's a diffuse pancreatic involvement, whereas the type 2 is the idiopathic duct-centric pancreatitis, which has normal serum IgG4 levels. It is not associated with the IgG4 disease and shows focal pancreatic involvement. So what is this autoimmune pancreatitis? It is a distinct form of chronic pancreatitis first reported in Japan. It can present frequently with obstructive jaundice and as a mass. It has a diffuse lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate, fibrosis, and shows a dramatic response to steroids. Therefore, the importance of diagnosing this lesion. The predominant extrapancreatic manifestations in autoimmune pancreatitis can be biliary stricture, interstitial nephritis, retroperitoneal fibrosis. So both these pancreatic and extrapancreatic lesions, they respond well to steroid therapy. So with this, I come to the end of this talk. And before I leave, I just want to stress that diagnosis of pancreatic lesions is a multidisciplinary integrated approach. Nothing is done in isolation. The imaging, the cytology, the biochemical analysis, and the clinical features must be correlated with each other. And you must know all these features, take it from the patient, from the radiologist, and then arrive at a diagnosis to have a high.
So much, Dr. Pooja, for the lovely presentation. I have a few questions for you. First one is, in which cases do you usually make a cell block in pancreatic lesions, and what are the advantages?
We usually do try to make cell block in all the cases of pancreatic FNA, especially when we suspect clinically or radiologically a tumor or autoimmune pancreatitis. Because for a tumor, we get the advantage of seeing the architecture and also for doing the immunohistochemistry as we would require for tumors and for autoimmune pancreatitis. So we do try to make cell block in all the cases, and with practice and expertise, you can get good material in the cell blocks.
Thank you so much. And the other question is that in your clinical practice, what is the role of immunohistochemistry in pancreatic tumors?
Yes. See, immunohistochemistry is something which we do extensively, but not usually for pancreatic ductal adenocarcinomas, but for other pancreatic tumors, like for example, a neuroendocrine tumor. Now you will have to confirm the diagnosis by putting up neuroendocrine markers like chromogranin, synaptophysin, and also Ki67 for the proliferation index for grading of the tumor. So that is one scenario. Also, in differentiating these neuroendocrine tumors from, say, solid pseudopapillary epithelial neoplasm, which is a closed differential, and you can demonstrate nuclear beta-catenin, CD10 positivity, and negativity for chromogranin. The other scenario is autoimmune pancreatitis, as I showed here, where you can demonstrate the IgG4 positivity in the plasma cells for a confirmatory diagnosis. And sometimes when you have very unusual types of adenocarcinomas like an adenosquamous, anaplastic carcinoma, and when you want to rule out a metastatic tumor from some other site like a renal or a lung tumor, at that point of time, IHC can come to your rescue and can be very helpful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the lovely presentation. Thank you, Nia, for your help.